Neighbours, Godspeed! Welcome to Sonnet Sisters. My name is Anna and today I will be reading Sonnet 27.
What was he on about? That body mister, come figure it out with the Sonnet Sisters.
Weary with toil, I haste me to my bed. The dear repose for limbs with travel tired. But then begins a journey in my head, to work my mind when body's work's expired. For then my thoughts, from far where I abide, intend a zealous pilgrimage to thee, and keep my drooping eyelids open wide, looking on darkness which the blind do see. Save that my soul's imaginary sight presents thy shadow to my sightless view, which, like a jewel hung in ghastly night, makes black night beauteous and her old face new. Lo, thus by day my limbs, by night my mind, for thee and for myself no quiet find.
What is the meaning of this?
Okay, my first impressions were calm TF down. This is a really hyperbolic, intense, kind of threatening almost ominous poem. And I don't know if it's because I've been watching a lot of Orange is the New Black recently. I've just started, so don't spoil it for me. But if any of you watch it, it really struck a chord with some of the ways that people in prison process feelings for people. Particularly there's a character called Suzanne, or Crazy Eyes, who obsesses over somebody and is hyperbolically demonstrative of her feelings. And there is the lead protagonist, Piper, who, on being separated from her fiancé, develops these obsessions over what he's doing, what he thinks of her, and their relationship. The sonnet speaker is separated from their love, and the way they're talking about their love and the way that they're engaging with their love is kind of intense and not quite normal, not quite a healthy, everyday relationship. And I'll talk about that a little more, but one thing that changes the poem massively at the end is the last line, and also the fact that it is followed by Sonnet 28, which forms a pair, a couple with it. So without that, I think this sonnet would take on a very different meaning. So let's start looking at the words and phrases and specific meanings that may have changed over time. First off, we have dear, which now, if we're using it as an adjective, it kind of means something like sweet. And in Shakespeare's time, it would have meant something more akin to precious. Travel is what is printed in the version I was reading, which is in this book here, but in the quarto version it was travail, Travail, and apparently travail and travel were kind of not considered very different in meaning in that time. And if you think about it, really, travel in Shakespeare's time was kind of hard work. There were rubbish roads, there were robberies, you were riding horses or going barefoot. It wasn't exactly Japanese bullet train territory. You couldn't, for example, send a booty call text and then Uber around the corner to your lover's house. In line 5, from far where I abide, kind of just means far from where I abide. In line 6, the word intend is used, and that has a slightly different meaning today than it did in Shakespeare's time. If we say I intend to these days, we mean I mean to, I promise to, in the future, whether that be short-term future or long-term future. I mean to do this thing, I believe I will do it, I want to do it. And in Shakespeare's time, it meant I begin to do this, I enact, I begin, I proceed with, I devote myself to. So I intend a zealous pilgrimage to thee means I begin one. In line 10, the word shadow is used, and yes, now we might see a dark patch behind us on the ground while the sun is in our face, but actually to Shakespeare a shadow is something a bit more spooky, a spectre or a vision or a ghostly image. In line 6, zealous, which is a word we don't really hear these days apart from in the context of calling somebody overzealous, and that has all sorts of connotations which I'm sure you're familiar with, but they're not really positive ones. Overzealous obviously means a surplus of, So zealous hasn't really changed its meaning itself, but we don't really use zealous. So, if we take away the over, what does zealous mean? It means earnest, passionate, devoted to, and you can see why overzealous would be used to describe some of the people that we describe as overzealous these days. But zealous, especially in Shakespeare's time, was considered kind of a worthy thing, right? Who doesn't want to be earnest or passionate or devoted? It actually uplifts the sonnet from this ominous thing that I was feeling and makes it a bit more honourable. In line 11 we have this lovely image of ghastly night. Now ghastly we only really use when something is really horrible, right? Yeah, it was the same in Shakespeare's time. And actually night itself was considered, kind of a horrible thing. It was the witching hour. It was the time when things were dark and people could creep around and do nasty things, kill people, hurt people. Spirits walked the earth, and some people saw night as kind of a gateway to hell. So this links in a little bit with the shadow and kind of puts this torturous, nightmarish framing around the vision that the sonneter is having of the sonnetee. And when we consider that, it's kind of even more sorrowful that the sonneter is only seeing their lover in this context. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about sound and style. This sonnet is a bit of a mess, but in a great way. If you say the sonnet out loud, it's not neat and tidy, it's heavy, it's hard work. There are dramatic, heavy words dumped on us with no fiery follow-up. I can imagine the speaker drawling this out at me as they fall asleep on my lap. It kind of perks up in the middle, but it's very slurred at the edges, and it kind of feels like maybe a drunk who's just woken up, gotten impassioned about their message, and then gone back to sleep. There are lots of wide yawning sounds. Wide, abide, night, sight, mind, find. Is it an over-effusive, overzealous, one might say, drunk? Then we have a few pairings which are quite nice. Thee and see. This sonnet is all about seeing this person's love. Sight and night, they only see their love at night, but only in their mind, and they do also call to their sensory sight, in which they see nothing. Mind and find, and of course in the mind is where they find their love. We have a few rather obvious themes. There's sleeplessness, separation. We have slightly less obvious themes of religion and devotion and spirituality. And of course there's the heavy lumbering theme of work, duty and toil. In terms of imagery, we don't really have anything nice in this sonnet. I think the nicest moment is maybe the brief second when the Black Knight's beauteous face is made new. But we have spirits, which are kind of a sad, torturous, scary thing. We have blindness. Again, he's using blindness to convey a sadness, a withoutness. There are journeys which are hard work and long and tiring. There are drooping eyelids, which, we all know, nodding dog syndrome. The structure and rhythm of this sonnet is what I was referring to when I said it was a mess. It's got all these feminine endings at the beginning, which kind of convey this moaning, warming up, stretching out, kind of groaning, awkward, stretching out of your limbs, unpretty sounds. And as is quite common in Shakespeare's sonnets, this serves to set up the scene of woe before he can embark on enlightening us with a moment of light relating to his love. The tone, in my first impressions, I thought was a bit jealous, a bit weak. It's kind of whiny, it's intense, it's overwrought. And yet this changes, as I say, in the last line and in the next sonnet. So before we go straight to the last line, let's think about this obsession over a lover. When do we obsess over love? I would argue that we do that most when it's new, when we have the least information about our lover, about what they're doing, we see them less. It's before it becomes habit, before we know we're safe, before we know it's reciprocated, which is what implied to me that this was a new love and that maybe they don't know how the lover feels in return, which was why it might have come across a bit creepy. I also think it could imply a love not allowed to run its full course, so perhaps this person has been they perceive unfairly removed from a lover, and like they're being kept away, they're owed time with their lover. And I think perhaps even more so in Shakespeare's time, there was a lot more of should when it came to who you should be with. Who you ended up with was a should rather than a would love to. One fun thing to consider is that Shakespeare, as he is wont to do, could here be aping an established genre, and that is of the haggard lover's wakeful weariness, which is what I'm obviously going to call my firstborn and my autobiography and my band. So when we consider all those sparse, separate, disparate meanings and contexts and ideas, what is this sonnet saying? Let's kind of turn it into a modern piece of text. Tired from work, I hurry to bed. The precious resting place for my body which is tired from work. But then I begin a new journey in my head, and my mind starts working when my body has finished working, because then my thoughts are far away from where I am, and they begin an enthusiastic journey to you. My thoughts keep my eyes open wide, thinking of you, and all I actually see with my eyes is darkness because it's night. Except that my imagination, my wishful imagination, brings you to mind. I see you in my sightless view, and like some kind of diamond in the middle of the sky, in the middle of the black, dark night sky, you make the ugly, dark night beautiful again. Behold, so this is how, in the day my body and in the night my mind are restless and find no peace and quiet. And when we look at the last line, let's look at the last line now. For thee and for myself no quiet find. Some people argue that the beginning for in this line means because. I disagree. What I do think it implies is that this is a reciprocal feeling affecting both the sonneteur and the sonnettee. There are two people in this relationship and it is mutual, and I think that is only enhanced by the presence of Sonnet 28. But I'm not going to encroach on Jennifer's territory because she will be analysing Sonnet 28 in 2 Mondays' time. We are going to have a gap next week because these two sonnets kind of form a lovely little pair, and Jennifer and I actually had the chance to film together for once and make this sonnet a pair of pieces that work together as a performance. So that will be coming out the week after Jennifer's analysis of Sonnet 28, so in 3 weeks' time. In terms of finding a performance context for this sonnet, this was heavily influenced by my discussions with Jennifer and the fact that these two sonnets are a pair. So we filmed them as a pair, and that changes things. It changes the tone of the sonnet, and it also meant that we were able to find a context that made more sense to us as people in the modern world, and one that made more sense, I think, authentically to the intention of the sonnet, because although originally the imagery and the feel of it is very different from what we did, I think it translates it into our time quite well. We'll see. We'll see how the footage turned out. I would love to hear your thoughts below in the comments. If you have any ideas that this sonnet sparks, tell me what you think it means. Tell me what you think it could be, how it could be set. Yeah, so we won't see you next week, but we will see you the following week. Until then, rest you merry.